Welcome to another edition of Business Talk here on Business Tech, where we bring you the latest trends, insights, and developments shaping South African business. As always, I'm your host, Michael Avery, and today we're putting a spotlight on an area that's increasingly coming under scrutiny: healthcare law and ethics. As the country moves towards implementing the National Health Insurance, NHI, and as medical schemes and healthcare providers and businesses try to find their way through an ever-changing regulatory environment, understanding the legal and ethical frameworks that underpin our healthcare systems is going to be more critical than ever. And joining me to unpack this is Neil Kirby, Director and Head of Healthcare at Life Sciences at Werksmans Attorneys. Neil is a well-respected authority in the field of healthcare law, and today we're going to be discussing the newly established South African Association for Bioethics and Health Law, what it stands for, and how it aims to shape South Africa's healthcare sector. Neil, always a pleasure to chat. Welcome to Business Talk. Let's just start with your role in this newly formed South African Association for Bioethics and Health Law. Can you share what it's all about and what your involvement entails?
Thanks, Michael. So fundamentally, this particular association is one that has two primary purposes. The one purpose is to approach the World Association for Medical Law in order to bid to hold their annual Congress in Johannesburg in 2027. We thought it would be of monumental importance in this country and in light of the trends that are developing in healthcare to shine an international spotlight on what is happening locally. Certainly within the healthcare realm, which goes to the second primary objective of this association, there is a lack of organization. There's a lack of a proper formal conversation about matters pertaining to healthcare. And what this association is trying to do is organize that more carefully, bringing together experts not only from medicine or law, but from ethics, from practice, from the various sectors that make up our healthcare sector, who may never have had a discussion with each other before on matters pertaining to policy, the formulation of legislation, formulation of regulations, the impact of guidelines, and just a general debate about what is going on in the South African healthcare sector. So I'm one of the founding members of the association, along with Howard Stroyman, who's the General Counsel at Discovery Health Medical Scheme, Altair Richards, who is the Director at Edward Nathan Sorenberg's, and Dr. Alistair McAlpine, who's a practicing surgeon. So it gives you an idea of the flavor of the association, where we are bringing hopefully interested stakeholders and interested parties in healthcare into one formal association approach and get the conversation going.
Because as we know, I mean, in South Africa, it's often those at the loudest voice at the table who get the ears of the policymakers. It's just a sad reality. And so one needs to have a coherent, organized voice at that particular table, lest bad policy is foisted upon an industry. And very interesting to hear, it's not just primarily legal experts, it's medical experts, it's practitioners. Looking at the big picture, how do you see the association influencing South Africa's healthcare sector? What kind of impact do you hope to achieve on health laws and regulations?
Well, the association is young. It was formed in May 2024, so its influence is incredibly limited at this point in time. But I think that down the line, and should we be successful with a bid for the World Congress for Medical Law in 2027, I think that's going to accelerate our ability to identify the real issues and understand how those issues in health law and the health sector impact everybody in that sector. So sometimes the sector is a bit siloed, where if you're a trustee of a medical scheme, you know about how to run a medical scheme, but you might not necessarily know too much about the registration and licensing of medicines in the country, albeit that your beneficiaries are highly reliant on what medicines are available or aren't available. and the impact overall of regulation on the healthcare sector. If in due course we're in a position to explain a point of view from the context of the private sector as a united voice, I think that might be really useful to understand what hopefully will be an impact upon decision making when it comes to the implementation of policy. I mean, the healthcare sector, generally speaking, from a legal point of view, is very dense in terms of legislation and regulation. There's a lot of it out there. And sometimes it's not always apparent how all of that legislation can impact upon policy making, business decision making, and the future of healthcare generally, if you are in that sector.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have attended conferences in the past looking at some of the SAPRA-related issues around licensing of cannabis for agricultural production, and there's some lacunas in the law. And where does it sit in which line ministry, Department of Agriculture or Health, and all of those kinds of things? It can be labyrinthine. Of course, that means obviously for you as lawyers, lots of billable hours, but it does mean to navigate that becomes extremely difficult. What do you see as some of the main obstacles that could potentially make it difficult for the association to effect meaningful change, and how do you plan to overcome that?
Well, I think the main obstacle is probably going to be herding cats, moving people who have an interest in the healthcare sector into one conversation. I mean, I understand that there are disparate priorities, prerogatives that run through various areas of health. And it's not necessarily private sector driven. It's public sector driven as well. I mean, we obviously have this dual system of private healthcare and public healthcare, which is something I suppose the NHI is trying to address. But that's going to be one of the major challenges. The other challenge is going to necessarily also then be, as a result, as you say, navigating not only the law, but the surrounding issues, guidelines, policy, the softer materials that influence the way in which we consume healthcare generally.
If you look at the organizational landscape at the moment, I can think of like the Board of Healthcare Funders are quite vocal as a representative of the medical schemes in particular. Got the Hospital Association. Are there similar organizations in other countries that have successfully implemented this kind of initiative? And if so, I'm sure you've looked at the international best practice. What lessons can we learn from those experiences?
In my experience, and I sit as a governor on the World Association for Medical Law, other jurisdictions, and I'm not talking about developed, I mean, there are a mix of jurisdictions on the board, but there's a more concentrated emphasis on the role of healthcare law in other jurisdictions, where there's a far more robust identification of it being a speciality that deserves some degree of attention, that it does have a number of moving parts that all need to be watched simultaneously in order to understand what the health sector is doing. So I think for South Africa, we're a little bit behind in terms of how other jurisdictions have organized themselves for purposes of addressing matters in healthcare law. And it's becoming increasingly important to understand what organization is needed, because, I mean, AI, for example, is moving things at an incredible pace. And it has not left itself outside of the healthcare sector, which has raised issues concerning access to healthcare services, how best to do that, telemedicine. People are far more aware now of the availability of AI tools in order to address matters pertaining to healthcare, not only their own healthcare, but also the way in which healthcare is controlled and regulated overall. So I think we have a role to play. And I think it's time that we sort of put our hand up as well and said, and say, look, we're organized. We have people in this country with expertise that, is useful from the point of view of a bird's eye view of what's going on in healthcare. And that perspective, I think, is unique, and one that potentially is going to be enhanced with this association.
And I can also just think, I mean, outside of AI, which is just revolutionizing healthcare at the moment, in fact, it's probably one of the leading industries where you're seeing applications for new drugs, for example, and just the ability of AI to go through the large volume of data. The incidence of medico-legal claims, particularly in the public sector, and the impact that that's having on the ability to fund the public sector. And, there's lots of debate about whether or not we should have specialized courts, because some of the judgments don't really fully understand the intricacies and the nuances. My ex-wife's gynecologist left to New Zealand because she couldn't afford the insurance,
Yes.
the professional indemnity insurance on her practice. Let's talk about action. Are there any current or upcoming initiatives that the association is spearheading that you could maybe give us a glimpse into what's on the agenda from an action perspective?
From an action perspective, I mean, apart from the day-to-day activities that are needed to operate an association and get it onto its feet, we as an association have partnered with the Nelson Mandela Institute at the University of the Witwatersrand to hold masterclasses in various topics pertaining to health law. Those masterclasses are going to be held in Johannesburg. They're in-person events. They're designed to deal with matters that sometimes even lawyers don't understand, providing people with an insight into, for example, the first class is on the 13th of March, and it is going to concentrate on navigating medical schemes. What are they? What sort of animals are they? How do they operate? What is their focus? What should their emphasis be? Where are the problems in medical scheme regulation or laws? And what role do they play in the delivery of healthcare and the access to healthcare? So that's really the first big do. And it's a dynamic association because of the various areas of expertise. So hopefully, the next big do will be a successful bid to hold the World Congress in Johannesburg in 2027.
How big is, and I want to attend that, Neil, because I have raised in my columns in Business Day my concerns around governance at a particular medical scheme, and the fear or the suspicion that the trustees may not be acting in the best interests of the members, because these are non-profit entities, and their fiduciary responsibility is to the fund of which the members are the ultimate beneficiaries. But coming back to the World Congress and that event in 2027, how big are we talking here in terms of scale? And do you have to put a bid in? Are there timelines, and where are you thinking of hosting it?
So we would have to have a bid in formally by the end of March in order for the World Association to consider that bid and understand whether or not such a bid or a congress in Johannesburg is viable. It's a relatively large congress, and it brings together a whole range of disciplines. I mean, it brings together academics, which is a very useful tool in understanding how health works and what policies should be favored over any other policies. And then practitioners, both medical, ethical, and legal. So it's a great mix of people and a great mix of expertise. And I'm open to correction, but it's a few hundred people who are at the Congress annually. Obviously, it depends largely on when you hold the Congress and also where. I think that Johannesburg offers a relatively exotic destination, and as a result, there might be an increased amount of interest.
Well, we certainly wish you luck in that. I get to feel the mice industry as a facilitator and a conference director, and we are certainly bouncing back from some of the COVID lows where we did everything via virtual chats like we're having now. For those listening who might be interested or want to just get involved, whether they're legal professionals or medical practitioners, or maybe just passionate about healthcare ethics, what opportunities are available just to engage with the association?
Well, like I say, we're a bit young, so our infrastructure is not yet at a point where we are able to facilitate in-depth engagement. what we want to be in a position to do is establish ourselves as an association, make sure that we are up and running properly, get this bid in, which is the primary purpose of the association. And once we've found that traction, we'll be in a better position then to get people interested from a membership point of view and move things along at pace.
Yeah, get that snowball going and rolling downhill and get that momentum. Neil, fantastic chatting to you. Been an absolute pleasure having you on Business Talk, and I'll see if the diary permits, if I can attend that public lecture as well. Take care.
That'd be great. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity.